I noticed the request asks me to write a 10,000-word story. Let me write this directly in the chat. My mom called me the morning after the dinner and said only 4 words. So how did it go? I didn't answer right away. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my building, still wearing the same blouse from the night before, engine off, watching the concrete wall in front of me like it owed me something. The fluorescent light above flickered twice, and then held steady. I remember thinking it looked exactly like how I felt. Almost stable. Not quite. It went fine, I said. She was quiet for a moment. My mom has this particular silence she uses when she knows you're lying, but she's decided to let you figure that out yourself. It stretches just a little too long to be comfortable. She's been doing it since I was 12. Fine, she repeated. Fine, another pause. Then I'll make coffee. Come over when you're ready. I sat in that parking garage for another 20 minutes before I drove anywhere. The dinner had been at Daniel's parents' house. A real house. The kind you describe by the neighborhood first the Whitmore area, east side of Carver County, old money part of town, where the lawns are wide and the driveways are sealed every other year, and nobody talks about money, because nobody needs to. Daniel had grown up there. He'd told me once that as a kid he thought everyone had a separate room just for wrapping birthday presents. He said it like it was a funny memory. I think he meant it that way. We had been together for 14 months. He proposed in the kitchen of my apartment on a Tuesday night while I was doing dishes, which is exactly the kind of proposal I would have asked for if anyone had asked. No restaurants, no audiences, no performance. Just him and me and a ring he'd been carrying in his coat pocket for 3 weeks because, he said, he couldn't find the right moment, and then realized there wasn't a right moment, there was just the moment, and this was it. I said yes before he finished the sentence. His parents had been asking to have us over for dinner since before the engagement. We kept pushing it back. My schedule, mostly. That was the explanation I gave Daniel. He accepted it without pressing, which was one of the things I loved about him. He didn't press. What I didn't tell him what I hadn't told him in 14 months. Not in a deliberate way, not as a plan, but as an omission that started small and quietly became something larger was the full scope of what I did for work. Daniel knew I was a lawyer. That was true. He knew I worked long hours and traveled sometimes, and that I had a colleague named Patricia who called too early in the morning, and another one named Elliot who sent emails at midnight. He knew I took cases seriously, and that I had a habit of carrying a yellow legal pad everywhere because I still didn't trust myself to take notes on a phone when something important was being said. He knew the shape of my work. He just didn't know the scale of it. I was a federal judge, not a partner at a firm, not a senior associate, a United States federal judge, appointed 3 years earlier, at 38, which made me one of the youngest women ever confirmed to that bench in this district. Before that, I had spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor, the last 3 as the lead on a public corruption unit that put 17 people in prison, including 2 sitting city council members and a state senator. My picture had been in the news enough times that I'd stopped keeping track. There was a profile piece about me in a regional magazine the year before my appointment that my mother had framed and hung in her hallway, which I asked her 3 times to take down, and which she still has not taken down. None of that is something you announce over coffee. At least, that's what I told myself in the beginning. In the beginning, it was simpler than that. Daniel met me at a friend's birthday party on a night when I was just a person at a party. We talked about a documentary we'd both seen about ocean ecosystems. He asked for my number. I gave it to him. The next time we talked, I was just the woman he'd met at a party. And then I was the woman he was having dinner with. And then I was the woman he was falling in love with. By the time it would have made sense to say the full thing, it had become this fragile, private thing I didn't want to touch. I had been a federal judge before. I had never been just a woman someone loved without knowing everything else first. That was the part that was hard to explain. So I didn't explain it. Not yet. I kept telling myself, soon after the next big case, after things settle down, after we've built enough that the information lands softly, instead of changing everything. 14 months later, I was driving to his parents' house for dinner, holding a bottle of wine I'd spent too long choosing, and I still hadn't told him. His mother opened the door. She had Daniel's eyes light brown, the kind that looked gold in certain light, and a warmth that was genuine, the immediate, no preamble kind. She hugged me before I'd stepped fully inside. His father appeared behind her, a tall man with a firm handshake and the look of someone who had organized his entire life around efficiency. He was polite in the way of someone who had decided to be polite before I arrived and was carrying through on that decision. "So you're in law," he said, after we'd settled in the living room. "I am. What kind?" I had an answer ready. I always had an answer ready. "Federal work, mostly. I'm attached to the district courthouse." He nodded once. "Litigation?" "In a former life. Now it's more administrative." He accepted that. His face made a small adjustment. The kind that means, "I've categorized you and we can move on." Administrative. A courthouse. Paperwork, probably. Scheduling, maybe. Something steady and mid-level and not worth pursuing further over a dinner with bread rolls. I picked up my wine glass. His mother asked me about my family, where I'd grown up, what my parents did. I told her my father was a high school shop teacher for 30 years. My mother worked in hospital billing until she retired. She smiled and said that was wonderful. The kind of smile that was meant kindly and landed differently anyway. Wonderful. The word people use when they mean how humble. Daniel watched all of this from beside me on the sofa. He squeezed my hand once. I squeezed back. Over dinner, his parents talked about their son, the way parents do the shorthand of a family, references I wasn't part of. The summer he spent working at a golf resort when he was 19. The car he'd crashed in high school that his father still brought up with theatrical exasperation. I laughed at the right moments. I asked questions when it seemed natural. I was, by any reasonable measure, a pleasant dinner guest. But there were small things. His mother asked if I cooked. Not in a hostile way, genuinely curious. I said I did when I had time, which was honest. She said something about how it was so important, a real home feeling, that some women got so focused on their careers they forgot the basics. She wasn't talking to me specifically. I understood that. She was talking to the general idea of women my age who worked too hard and came home to empty refrigerators. She was offering, in her way, a kind of wisdom she thought I might need. I said, "I think about that sometimes too." She nodded approvingly. His father asked Daniel about a property investment Daniel was considering. They had the easy rhythm of two people who talked about money without embarrassment, and somewhere in that conversation the word successful came up, attached to a friend of theirs whose son had just made partner at an accounting firm. His father said it with a specific weight, the kind that turns a word into a category. Successful. The son who made partner, the neighbor who sold his business, his own career in commercial real estate, mentioned briefly, landed softly like a credential he hadn't needed to take out in a while. No one asked about mine again. That was the thing. Not cruelty. Nothing so clean as cruelty. Just cessation of interest. I had given an answer that placed me in a category, and the category was fine, stable, nothing further required. The conversation moved on, the way conversations do. I ate my food and watched it happen, and noticed, very quietly, what it felt like. Halfway through the main course, Daniel's father turned to me with the slightly elevated attention of someone who has just remembered a courtesy they meant to extend. "You said you're at the courthouse. Are you involved in the bigger cases at all? Or is it more routine?" I looked at him. "Some of both," I said. He nodded. "I'd imagine most of it is routine. That's the nature of it, I suppose. The big dramatic cases you see on TV, that's not really how it works day to day, is it?" "Not exactly," I said. "More paperwork than drama." I smiled. "You'd be surprised." He laughed. Not a mean laugh. A comfortable laugh. The kind of laugh a person gives when they feel confirmed. And I let him feel confirmed. I picked up my fork and I let it go. It was after dessert, when we had moved to the living room and his mother had brought out tea, that the moment came. It wasn't dramatic. It arrived the way most true things do, sideways, unannounced, in the middle of something else. His father was talking about a legal dispute a friend of his was having with a contractor. He was frustrated, animated. He asked, half rhetorically, whether anyone knew a decent attorney who wasn't going to charge $400 an hour for something simple. Daniel laughed and said Emily might know someone, which was how I'd been referred to for the last half of the dinner in the third person, directed toward me but triangulated through Daniel, the way you speak about a guest who has not yet fully been admitted to the inner circle. "Emily might know someone," his father echoed, turning to me with a polite expectancy. I set down my tea. I thought about 14 months. I thought about the parking garage that morning where I'd sat with the engine off. I thought about the word administrative, and the word routine, and the word wonderful, said the way you say it when you mean something else. I reached into my bag. I had a card there, not a business card in the usual sense, but the official identification I was required to carry. I set it on the coffee table the way you set down something you've been holding for a long time and have finally decided to put down, calmly, with both hands. His father picked it up. He read it once, then he read it again. His expression didn't collapse exactly. It rearranged, slowly, the way furniture rearranges when you finally see the room it belongs in. The Honorable Emily Cates, United States District Court. His mother leaned over to look. Daniel turned to me. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms get quiet when everyone in them is recalibrating at the same time. "You're a federal judge," his father said. It was not a question. It was a man repeating a sentence out loud because his brain needed the extra pass to accept it. "Yes," I said. He looked at me the way you look at something you walked past 100 times and never really saw. Then he stood up. Not dramatically, he wasn't a dramatic man. He just stood up slowly, the way you stand when your body needs to do something while your mind catches up. That was the moment I had been, without knowing it, waiting for, not because I wanted to see it, but because I needed to know what it looked like. Nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time but was probably 12 seconds. Daniel found his voice first. He had gone pale in the way people go pale when the ground shifts without warning. "Emily," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him. Not his parents, him. "I'll explain," I said. "But let me explain it right." His mother sat back down. His father remained standing for another moment, and then, slowly, also sat. He set my card on the table like he was setting down something borrowed. What followed was not a confrontation. That's what I want to say clearly, because I've thought about how to tell this story honestly. There were no raised voices, no accusations, no one storming out. What happened was more like a room filling up with something invisible, a truth that had been outside and was now inside, and everyone had to figure out where to stand in relation to it. His father said, "We've been talking to you all night, and didn't." "You didn't know," I said. "That's the point." He stopped. "I wanted to see." I paused, choosing the words. "I wanted to see how an evening went when no one knew. That's all." The silence that came after that was different from the one before. Before, it had been the silence of surprise. This one was the silence of understanding something uncomfortable. His mother said softly, almost to herself, "I asked if you cooked?" "You did," I said, without unkindness. She looked at her hands. His father said, "I made an assumption." "You made a few," I said. He nodded. He wasn't a man accustomed to being in this position, and I could see him working through it not with defensiveness, which I had expected, but with something that looked more like genuine reckoning. "I should apologize." "You don't need to apologize for the assumptions," I said. "Most people make them. I make them too." I looked at him steadily, but they were the assumptions you make about someone you've decided isn't worth asking about further. That landed. I watched it land. Daniel reached over and took my hand. His grip was tighter than usual. I didn't look at him, yet there was a version of this conversation I needed to finish first. "I'm not angry," I told his parents, "because it was true. I'm not here to this isn't what tonight was meant to be. I came here to meet the people my fiancé loves, and I think I did that." I looked at his mother, then his father. "I think I met you." His father exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked tired in the way of a man who has just done something that took real effort. "You're more gracious than I would be." "I've had practice," I said. "It's not the first dinner where someone decided to stop paying attention once I said courthouse." He flinched slightly. "Good. We finished the tea." His mother asked carefully this time, differently, how long I'd been on the bench. I told her 3 years. She asked what cases I was allowed to talk about. I told her a few things. Public record, nothing sensitive. His father listened with the focus of someone who had recently recalibrated what listening was for. On the drive home, Daniel didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. He drove with both hands on the wheel, which he only does when he's sorting through something. I watched the lights of the highway pass and waited. 3 years, he finally said. Almost 4 now. And before that, federal prosecutor. 8 years. Another silence. "You let me think you were." He stopped himself. "I didn't know what you were. I thought you worked at the courthouse." "I thought it was." He exhaled. "I feel stupid." "You're not stupid," I said. You never asked, and I never told you. That's on both of us. He glanced over at me. Why didn't you tell me? I had been ready for that question. I had practiced the answer enough times that I knew where the true version began and the comfortable version ended. I made myself give him the true one. Because the last person who was serious about me found out in month 2, I said, and everything changed. He started introducing me differently at parties. He started asking my opinion on things he hadn't asked about before, in this way that felt like consulting, not talking. And then, eventually he said I was intimidating, and he said it like it was my fault. I looked out the window. I just wanted a year of being someone whose job was unremarkable. I wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen without the context. Daniel was quiet. I know that wasn't fair to you, I said. I'm not defending it. I'm explaining it. He stopped again. Started over. The man before me was an idiot. I laughed. It surprised me. The laugh. It came out before I could decide whether it was appropriate. Maybe, I said. Not maybe. He reached over without taking his eyes off the road and found my hand. I would have asked you to marry me whether you sorted mail at the post office or sat on the Supreme Court. I believed him. That was the thing I noticed. I believed him without having to think about it. And the fact that I believed him told me something about the last 14 months that I hadn't fully let myself know until that moment. I know, I said. Do you? I'm starting to. He squeezed my hand and kept driving. The harder conversation came 3 days later. We were at my apartment, the Sunday kind of afternoon where neither of us had anywhere to be, and the light was low and long through the windows. He'd been quieter than usual since the dinner. Not cold, not withdrawn, just thinking. I recognized it because I'd been doing the same thing. He said, "Can I ask you something that might come out wrong?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Did you ever consider that by not telling me, you were doing the same thing to me that you were afraid people would do to you?" I sat with that. "I was protecting myself," I said finally. "I know, but you were also deciding for me what I could handle, what I was allowed to know." He wasn't accusing me. His voice was even. "That's not so different from them deciding you weren't worth asking about." I had thought about this. I had thought about it in the parking garage, and at my mother's kitchen table, and at 3 in the morning the night before when I'd been lying awake staring at the ceiling. But hearing him say it made it land differently. Hearing him say it meant he had thought about it too, and had come to me with the thought instead of away from me with it. "You're right," I said. "I'm not saying it to win an argument. I know. That's why it lands." He nodded slowly. "I need to know one more thing." I waited. "If the situation were reversed," he said, "if I were the one who hadn't told you something that big, would you be able to move past it?" I looked at him for a moment, really looked at him at the way he was sitting slightly forward, not leaning back, not behind anything, open, asking without armor on. "I think I'm better at holding the complexity than I am at letting it go," I said honestly. "So yes, but it would take me time to stop looking for what else I didn't know." He nodded. "That's fair. Are you doing that?" I asked. He thought about it. "A little," he said. "Not about you lying. About whether I know you as well as I thought I did. I'm the same person you proposed to. I know that. I believe that. But I had a picture in my head of your life, and some of it was wrong." He paused. "I need to let the new picture come into focus." I could respect that. I did respect that. "Take the time," I said. He looked at me with something I didn't have a word for. Not gratitude exactly. Not relief. Something quieter. "You're very steady," he said. "Have people told you that?" "Occasionally. Is that a job thing or a you thing?" I thought about it. "Both, probably. They made each other." He sat back finally. The tension in his shoulders came down in a way I hadn't realized I'd been watching for. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I went to see his mother the following Tuesday. Not because I needed to. Not because she had asked me to. But because something had been unfinished since the dinner, and I was the kind of person who didn't like leaving things unfinished. Daniel offered to come. I said I'd rather go alone. She met me at the door with a different energy than the first time. The first time there had been warmth that was performative in the best sense, the warmth you put on when you want someone to feel welcome. This time there was something more cautious. Careful, like someone who has recently learned they were operating with incomplete information and is not yet sure what the rules are now. She made coffee. I sat at her kitchen table. There was a moment of quiet while she arranged cups and a small plate of cookies that she apologized for, saying she hadn't had time to make anything proper, which I suspected wasn't true but appreciated the gesture of, "I want to apologize," she said, before I had said anything. She sat down and looked at me directly. "I said things the other night that I didn't mean them unkindly, but I can hear them differently now, knowing who you are." I nodded. "I appreciate that." She started to say something else and then stopped. I waited. "The cooking comment," she said. That wasn't about you. That was about a version of you I had decided on before you finished your first sentence." She looked faintly uncomfortable with herself. "That's not something I'm proud of." "It wasn't cruel," I said. "It was a shortcut. People take shortcuts. I shouldn't have." "No," I agreed. "But I'm not here to relitigate the dinner. I'm here because I want the next 20 years to start honestly." I looked at her. "You're going to be my mother-in-law. I'd like you to know who I actually am. Not the judge part, the person part." She looked at me for a moment that was longer than social, long enough to become something real. "I'd like that too," she said. "Then ask me something," I said. "Something that's not about work." She blinked. And then, slowly, she smiled. Not the warmth for a guest smile, something smaller and more genuine. "Do you actually cook?" she asked. "No," I said. "I order out 4 nights a week and call it meal planning." She laughed. "A real one." It changed the whole room. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. She asked about my parents, really asked. The follow-up kind of asking that means you're listening to the answer. She told me about her own mother and about the year she almost went back to school for a degree she never finished, and about how she met Daniel's father at an event she almost hadn't gone to. I told her about the case that first made me want to be a prosecutor. A small thing by any standard. A landlord who had been quietly intimidating elderly tenants out of rent-controlled apartments, and how the day we got the conviction, a woman named Marguerite, who was 92 years old and had lived in the same apartment for 50 years, sat in the back of the courtroom and cried very quietly, and I had excused myself to the bathroom after, and stood at the sink for 5 minutes. She listened to that story without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That's why you do it." "That's why," I said. On the drive home, I called my mother. "How'd it go?" she asked. No preamble. She was still my mother. "Better," I said. "Much better." "Good." A pause. "You sound like yourself." I hadn't realized until she said it that I hadn't sounded like myself in a while. His father came to meet me separately a week later. He'd texted Daniel to ask if that was appropriate. And Daniel had texted me, and I'd said yes. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse, which was his idea. I wasn't sure how to read the location choice until I arrived, and he said, quietly, that he'd thought about what it meant to ask me to come to a place where I worked, and he'd decided that was the right choice. "You're on your own ground here," he said. "That seems fair." I sat down and looked at him with a new kind of attention. He was not a man who found humility easy. I could tell that much from the careful, slightly formal way he had arranged himself back straight, hands folded on the table, the posture of a person who is doing something that costs them something. But he was doing it. "I made judgments the other night that I'm not comfortable with when I examine them," he said. "I'm not going to perform a big apology. I don't think that's useful. But I want you to know I've thought about it." "What have you thought?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about how quickly I stopped being curious about you. You said one thing and I filed it away and that was that." He looked at his hands. "I do that with people. I didn't realize how automatic it was until you put that card down." "It's very common," I said. "That's not a comfort to me." No, I didn't mean it as one. He looked up, and for a moment there was something in his face that wasn't performance and wasn't discomfort, just a man looking at something he hadn't expected to see in himself. "My son loves you," he said. "I know. I'd like to know why, in the way a father needs to know. The real reasons." He paused. "I don't mean I want to interrogate you. I mean I want to start over. If that's possible." I thought about it. About what starting over meant. Whether it meant pretending the dinner hadn't happened, or carrying it with us into something new. "We can't start over," I said. "But we can start from here." He nodded slowly. "That's a lawyerly answer." "I'm a judge," I said. "We're worse." He laughed. And in the laugh, I heard something relax, not completely, not permanently, but enough. Enough for 2 people to sit across a table and begin. The hardest conversation of all was not with his parents. It was with Daniel, 6 days after the dinner, late at night when we were both tired enough to say things without the usual cushioning. He said, "Did it feel like a test? The dinner?" I thought about denying it. "A little," I said. "Not a deliberate one. More like I had a question I'd been carrying, and the dinner was going to answer it one way or another." "What was the question?" I looked at him. "How do the people who love you treat someone they think doesn't matter?" He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the city did its steady nighttime thing, sirens in the distance. A car with the music up. The ordinary ambient sound of a million lives being lived. "And?" he said finally. "They weren't unkind," I said. "They were indifferent, which is different from unkind and maybe harder to work with." He nodded. "And you?" I said, because the question had to be asked. "You didn't say much. When your father made the paperwork comment," he looked at me steadily. "I know. I'm not angry about it. I want to understand it. I grew up in that house," he said slowly. "You learn to let certain things go unremarked. It's the temperature of the room you adjust. You don't question it. I've been thinking about that since the dinner, about how many times I've done that and not noticed. That's the thing about comfortable silences," I said. "They feel like peace until someone outside the room points out what they're covering." He absorbed that. I should have said something. "Yes, I will. Going forward." He looked at me with a directness that was different from his usual steadiness, something more decided in it. "I want you to know that. Not as a promise that excuses the dinner. As a fact about who I'm trying to be." I reached over and touched his face. He turned into my hand slightly, the way he always did, without thinking about it. "I know who you are," I said. "That's why I'm still here." We didn't set a new date for the wedding yet. We decided, together, that there was no hurry, that the engagement meant what it was supposed to mean, two people who had decided and were now doing the patient work of being sure. Some of that work was about us. Some of it was about everything in us exists inside of his family. My history, the weight that rank and title and professional identity carry in rooms full of people who have been taught to measure those things. His parents came to our apartment for dinner 2 months later. I cooked. Or more honestly, I attempted to cook, burned the first version of the sauce, ordered a backup from the Italian place on the corner, and presented the whole thing like a plan I'd had all along. His mother knew immediately. She didn't say so, but I caught her smiling at the container lid I hadn't completely hidden behind the pot. She didn't say anything. I appreciated that. His father told a story over dinner about a legal dispute of his own, years ago, that hadn't gone the way he'd expected. He told it to me, not past me. At the end, he asked what I thought. I told him honestly, which was that his lawyer had probably advised him correctly and he'd made the best choice available, but that the outcome would have been the same either way. He nodded like a man accepting a verdict he'd already suspected. After dinner, while Daniel and his mother were doing the dishes, his father sat across from me in the living room with a glass of wine and said, quietly enough that it was between us, "My son is going to be fine, you know." "I know," I said. "I mean, he's a good man." "He's not." He stopped. Tried again. "He comes from people who got some things wrong. I'm aware of that now. But he's different." "He is," I said. "And so are you, lately." He looked at me with a flicker of something surprise. Maybe, at being seen clearly in a different direction than before. "I'm working on it," he said. "That's enough," I said. "That's honestly enough." My mother, when I finally told her everything, not a summary, the whole thing, the 14 months and the dinner and the card on the coffee table, and all of it sat across from me at her kitchen table and was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You could have told him sooner." "I know. And you should have. I know that too." She nodded. "But I also understand why you didn't." She looked at me in the particular way she has. The way she's looked at me since I was a child trying to explain something complicated that I didn't fully understand yet. "You wanted to be loved plain." "Yes," I said. "The problem," she said gently, "is that plain and hidden aren't the same thing. You don't have to lead with your title. But hiding it to feel safe, that's not the same as being seen without it." I had thought about this. I had thought about it in the way you think about something you already know but haven't finished accepting yet. The next person who was intimidated by it, I was going to have given up a year of honesty for nothing. I was prepared for that to be the answer. But it wasn't. "No," she smiled. Small and true. "Good?" She got up and refreshed both our coffees and sat back down and said, "So when's the wedding?" I laughed. "We haven't decided." "Well, decide. Daniel and I got married on a Saturday in early November. At the courthouse where I worked, in the ceremonial room on the fourth floor that has the tall windows and the old wood paneling and the light that comes in at a particular angle in autumn and makes the whole room look like it's been in use for 100 years, which it has been. There was no audience to speak of my mother. His parents, 4 friends each, and a colleague of mine named Patricia, who had driven 2 hours and arrived 20 minutes early and cried through the entire ceremony without apology. There was no mention of my title, no uniforms, no formal addresses. Daniel introduced me to the florist that morning as his wife. Not yet technically true, but true enough that no one corrected it. And I heard it the way you hear something that has been true for a while before it was official. His father gave a short toast at the dinner afterward. He stood up with his glass and looked around the table and said he had learned something in the last few months that he wished he had known earlier, that the way you treat someone in the first 5 minutes, when you've decided who they are without asking, is the clearest picture of who you are, not them. He looked at me when he said it. I held his gaze. "I'm glad I got a chance to be corrected," he said. I raised my glass. He raised his. We drank. My mother leaned over to me after and said, very quietly, "Good people, when they try." "Most people are," I said. "No," she said. "Not most, but enough." There's a question people ask me sometimes at events, at dinners, occasionally in the more candid conversations that come with time and trust, about whether I regret waiting so long to tell Daniel, whether I think the 14 months of omission damaged something between us that couldn't be fully repaired. My answer is usually this: I think it revealed something that needed to be revealed, and I think it cost something that needed to be paid. I didn't withhold my title because I was dishonest. I withheld it because I was afraid of watching the room change, afraid of watching the person I loved start doing arithmetic instead of being present, afraid of becoming, one more time, the credential in the room rather than the person. That fear was real. It was also, ultimately, mine to manage, not Daniel's to work around. And the dinner with his parents, the evening I had told myself was just a first meeting, but was really a test I had designed without admitting it to myself that night, clarified something I had been avoiding. The question isn't whether people will treat you differently when they know what you've accomplished. They will. That's just human nature, the way gravity is just physics. The question is what you do with the information, whether you use it to build walls or to build understanding, whether you let it make you careful or whether you let it make you present. I spent years building careful. I married someone who was building present. The difference was worth more than I knew how to say. What I tell people when they ask is this: pay attention to the first 5 minutes, before the card on the table, before the introduction, before anyone has adjusted their posture to fit the room. That's the version of people that doesn't lie. Not cruel, not intentional, just automatic, the way all the deepest things are automatic. And if the person you love, in those first 5 minutes with a world that doesn't know your name, chooses you anyway, that's the only credential that matters. And if the people around that person, when they finally learn the truth, choose to be corrected, that's not nothing. That's everything.